Worley is a man who has both terrified and mesmerized Northwest Ohio for nearly 9 years. He's the subject of this week's 11 Investigates case files. Worley is a kidnapper of 2 young women, a killer of one, and a suspected killer of another.
And many people believe he could be responsible for more. I've gotten so many phone calls and emails, messages over the years with people who really believe that he killed more women. There have been podcasts, online discussions, Reddit conversations, all related to whether Worley has killed more women in our area or in others. Just a few years ago, the FBI conducted a search at Worley's property that was unrelated to the Sierra Joggin case. And I met with the FBI and asked them these very questions. Take a look.
It was shocking.
People tend to repeat behaviors.
Always displayed a very uneasy persona.
He just has that personality and narcissistic behavior.
July 19th, 2016. James Worley kidnapped Sierra Joggin while she rides her bike 26 years after his first victim escaped his grasp.
And I just know his strength and his anger.
Robin Gardner is the only known person familiar with the terror Sierra endured that summer night on County Road 6.
I know what it feels like to be in his arms and hear his yelling and hear his expletives and hear his hatred toward women.
Gardner was abducted by Worley on Obie Road back in White House in 1990. She got away and he served 3 years, but she's adamant there had to be others.
I don't think anybody like him could go 26 years without doing what he did, because you don't just do it and then suppress it and then do it again. I mean, that just, for a logical, normal, sane person, that just doesn't make any sense.
We will always have that theory also.
Vicki Anderson, special agent with the FBI.
It is highly unusual that someone that would have offended in a similar manner 20-some years before, has now done this and hasn't done anything in between.
Investigators have said Worley fits the profile of a serial offender. But searches of his so-called barn of horrors property, including this one last year, turned up no other bodies or evidence of other victims.
We haven't found anything, obviously, to charge him with in regards to that time period in between, but it's something that has been looked into. It continues to be looked into.
According to court documents, Worley told a court-mandated therapist that he learned from each abduction he had done and the next one he was going to bury.
We have received calls from various parts of the country. Mr. Worley was known to drive a truck. There are individuals that have been missing from the region that it's been looked at.
My mom comes out and she always decorates for
The
this
question
season,
of whether
so
there are
yes.
more victims is motivation for her family to continue sharing Sierra's story.
I feel that he was a master of his craft. He had gloves everywhere. He was not going to leave behind DNA. He was very sloppy with Sierra, and we're lucky for that.
I believe that there was more people in between Robin and Sierra. And the more the story is shared, the more chance there is that another family, another victim could have justice.
So this is the story and the person that I get the most phone calls, emails, personal interactions, Facebook messages about is various missing women in our area. And did James Worley have anything to do with it? The reason that we wanted to do this Case Files episode, though, is that James Worley was to be executed today on May 20th, 2025. That is today's date. That appears to be on hold. Governor DeWine has said he doesn't anticipate allowing any more executions during the rest of his term as governor. due to a problem with one of the medications for lethal injection. He's governor through 2026, so we'll see what happens then. I've reached out to the Ohio Public Defender's Office, the prison system, and the Ohio Supreme Court, who sets execution dates. And as of today, again, May 20th, we still don't have a clear answer as to whether that date has been set in stone and now moved, or what the status is.
Yeah, as of March, there were 113 people on Ohio's death row. And as you said, Governor DeWine, he said through the end of his term at the end of 2026, he does not plan on any other people being executed. Right now in Ohio, execution has to be done by lethal injection. And the problem with lethal injection is it's really difficult to get those drugs. So there's been a couple bills using nitrogen gas as one method. So they are considering that, but they're also considering outlawing death penalty in Ohio.
So I know that Sierra Joggin's family was relieved and grateful when his death date was set, but that's not happened. The other reason that we wanted to do this podcast is just really revisit something that we have that no other station or journalist has, and that just kind of came up with a podcaster the other week. I don't remember the name of the podcast, but you put me in touch with someone who asked me some questions about Worley.
Yeah, True Crime Garage. Nick Edwards had actually reached out and he had talked to him, and I know they're just revisiting this. And that story that you just saw there, unfortunately, I've done a lot of research into serial killers, and there's a couple things that jump out about that story. You hear that he's a truck driver. Unfortunately, one way or another, I mean, there are a lot of truck drivers that are, obviously, I'm not trying to disparage truck drivers here, but when you look at serial killers, it makes it easy for them to pick up victims because they're traveling across the country or whatever. So that's one thing that jumped out when I heard that, but also that he was refining his MO is what they call it, and that's what we know about serial killers. They really do refine this over a period of time, and this all starts with a lot of these killers with a very active fantasy life, and they fantasize how they want to do this. Then they come up with a plan and put it in action. And what you saw there with Robin Gardner, that was very similar to what happened to Sierra Joggin, right?
And I think the MO is interesting because that podcaster, Nick, he said to me, because we're going to get into another woman who is linked to him, Claudia Sissy Tinsley, she was outside of what had become known as his type. Robin and Sierra, you could say, were similar, but Claudia Sissy Tinsley was not. And here's how I want to get into this. So in 2022, and you can even get close on this because I know people are interested in this. James Worley started writing me letters. You can see, hi, Melissa.
Yeah, it was like March of 2022.
Yeah, so he starts writing me letters from prison, and he wants to basically have me to the prison for 6 hours to discuss his story and what he's been accused of. And so we go back and forth writing because he has some demands that he wants to spell out. No cameras, I need to be there all day, etc. So we go back and forth, and then he proceeds to send me what I call the manifesto. It's 105 pages. And this, I mean, it's incredible. It has testimony from court, some evidence, photos, and he basically spells out why he says he was framed for Sierra Joggin's murder. But it's within this document that we learn about his connection to Claudia Sissy Tinsley.
Yeah, it actually backfired on him. I mean, I have gone through all 105 pages, and he actually did put it together pretty well as far as testimony and pictures and why he believed that he was framed. Of course, I don't believe any of it, but he put it together. But you're right. So within those 105 pages, that's where you learned about Claudia
it had never
Tinsley.
been publicly revealed before. And of course, we always like to go to the police and ask who could be linked to James Worley, but they really kind of had to confront this once we went to them with this. So I've got a story, hang in there, it's 8 minutes, but it's my interview with James Worley on death row, and we get into his connection with yet another woman, Claudia Sissy Tinsley.
He admitted being with her.
Sissy, you know, she was my big sister, you know, and it's like, I was her little brother, you know, and we always had a close relationship.
It was September 8th, 1996. James Worley was 37, a convicted kidnapper back on the streets. Claudia Sissy Tinsley, 24 years old, working the same avenues of North Toledo.
And, you know, my mom was always just saying that, you know, it's just, the things she's doing is getting worse, and it's going to basically catch up to her.
Their paths would cross and end in Claudia's disappearance. The sister, daughter, mother of 3, gone forever.
He said he had picked her up somewhere around the Summit Cherry area after a festival. She got in the car, they made several stops, they drove around for a little while.
Worley details their meeting in a 105-page report he sent me in April. He says Claudia's case is when police began harassing him, leading up to what he calls a frame job for Sierra Joggin's murder in 2016. I visited Worley on death row to ask him myself.
You met Claudia when you were leaving the German-American Festival.
Yes.
And you picked her up. She took you home to meet her mother?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, not to meet her. We went several places, and along the way of stopping in front of, like along the curb, and she'd get out or they'd walk up to the car. She talked to her friends and so forth, and eventually we ended up going over to her mom's home, and I said, what should I do? And she said, well, come on in. And so I went in with her, and her mom's there, and there were some kids there, and maybe a couple other adults. And we were there for, I would think, no more than 10 minutes or so, and we left. And it was at that point in time, as you read in my one, that the mother, wrote down my license plate number. And that's how I got involved in this whole thing.
I don't know if my sister had told her that she had a bad feeling, or it was just my mom had a bad feeling. But, you know, she pretty much begged her not to get in the car, not to go. And, you know, she just watched her get in the car, drive off. And that was the last thing she had in her mind was her leaving. And she just had a feeling she's never going to see her again.
It sounds like it wasn't typical at all, that she just had some sort of suspicion. Her mother did ask her, you know, don't go with this guy. Maybe she gave it to her mom just, you know, to try to calm her mind. They were able to talk to a witness who saw Worley and Claudia together.
So when's the last time that you saw Claudia?
That was the only time.
When was the last, so you guys went off to have oral sex after her mom's house?
Yes.
Okay, and then you dropped her off?
And that was it.
And you don't remember where you dropped her off?
No.
And did you remember a few days later when they had questioned you about where?
They didn't get hold of me until approximately, I would say, within a week or 10 days. Yeah. The detective Dumas called me, and he asked if I was willing to talk with him. I said, sure. He said that they were looking for her, and I said, well, why? What has she done? And he said, well, her mother is worried about her. She hasn't seen her. And so I went down and I spoke with Dumas, and while I was there, he told me, he said, this isn't the first time this has happened with Claudia.
Right. But did you drive the blue Chevy that was described, and did you have a blue Chevy that she was last seen in? At the time?
I know that my new car that I bought during the first 3 years that I had it spent over a year in the shop because I kept breaking down. And the dealership was giving me cars to drive while I was in the shop. Mm-hmm. And I want to say that it was a blue car, but I'm not sure if it was a Chevy or not.
It was this blue 1995 Chevy Beretta Worley was driving on September 8th, with the same license plate number Claudia Tinsley asked her mother to write down.
The investigators followed up with that plate, found out it came back to a leasing company, and that leasing company gave them the person it was rented to, and that was James Worley.
So is James Worley the last person seen with Claudia Tinsley?
Yes. He is the last person we know of that's seen her.
And you were the last person to see her alive.
Now, who said that?
Well, her missing persons report says that she was last seen getting into a blue Chevy.
That was the mother jotted down my license plate number.
And she was never seen again.
According to
the
mother.
police.
According to the mother.
What stood out about him that makes him so prominent in these files?
We were able to verify the fact that he did drive around with her, which would be a little unusual if you're simply going to engage a prostitute. He was with her probably 40 minutes, making several trips. Seems a little unusual to me that if you're simply out for sex, that you're going to drive around with this person, making different stops throughout the North End. It's not common. It wouldn't be regular. It seemed like he was more interested than just a sexual encounter.
Worley was questioned, the car tested, but there was no sign of Claudia. The case dried up until the year 2000, when Worley was again brought in for questioning. This time, police had a surprise for him.
I never even really, after a while, even thought about her until detectives were at my door 4 years later.
With the assistance of Fulton County, they were preparing to do a search warrant at his residence.
Detectives scoured Worley's property in Fulton County for Claudia. It's the same place he would kill Sierra Joggin 16 years later.
You know, it was a possibility. They had never explored the possibility that he may have taken her out there. So I think at that point they thought, well, we probably should have considered it, and let's do that.
They found nothing connecting Worley to Claudia. They did find some marijuana plants he was growing, and Worley served another 2 years for that. 22 more years have come and gone. Never enough evidence to charge Worley for Claudia's disappearance, and with no body or witnesses, there may never be.
You know, it would take somebody that this person has talked to and told them that, hey, this is what I've done, and we don't have that yet.
Claudia Tinsley's mom died of cancer in 2018 without finding her daughter.
I think in her mind she knew that she was never going to come home, and we probably were never going to find her.
And Claudia would have turned 50 years old just a few days ago.
I really think maybe if they would have found her alive or something, it would have been a turning point. Maybe it would scared her straight, but she never got that chance.
And Claudia Tinsley would actually be 53 years old later this week on May 22nd.
Yeah, have you heard anything else about this case over the last couple of years?
No, I haven't. And you know what, Brian? It reminds me of a lot of cases where we talk to police and they'll admit this is who we think it is. All of our evidence points to this, but it's just not enough. And unfortunately, there are a lot of cases like that.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was saying about serial killers. I mean, if he truly is a serial killer, these guys do it as this is what they do. They study how to hunt, they study how to get away with this, and that's why they're serial killers, because they're able to kill multiple people and get away with it. It's not like, if you think of like a spur of the moment, a spontaneous killing, a rage killing, something like that, a person is really apt to kind of leave behind evidence. But when you're stalking people and you're planning it, you're like, okay, I want to make sure I do this, this, and this. So sometimes it's hard to find evidence in these cases.
So people have found it very interesting that Claudia doesn't fit in with Robin and Sierra, who were two young girls in their 20s who lived out in the country and were riding their bike. But I kind of sensed when I rewatched that, because it's been a couple years, he had a disdain. You know, he said, I pointed it out to you. He talked about her being a prostitute, and the police come and question him, and he says, well, what did she do? You know, she was a prostitute. But sex workers are often victims of killers and serial killers.
They often are, and you're looking at people who are really vulnerable. So in this case, she was a prostitute. Think of Sierra and Robin, they're riding their bikes and they're in a vulnerable position. So you're right. I mean, prostitutes are probably the #1 victims of serial killers because, you know, they're vulnerable. They get in that car with a stranger. And in a lot of cases, people maybe don't care about them and they're not going to be looking.
And here's the other thing that's always been said to me about Worley. There are many people out there in that Berkey, Metamora, Delta, Swanton area that have told me many stories about him just being a creepy guy. When you see him, he's creepy. He's acted creepy with teenagers at parties, hanging out with people that are younger than people he should probably hang out with. And when I asked this woman that always brings up Worley to me because she's very invested, you know, what about the fact that Claudia doesn't match with Robin and Sierra? And she said, he can't get close to any women because he's so creepy and he makes them so uneasy.
Yeah,
and so that to me was a decent explanation.
Yeah, and so when you're talking about that, you think of Claudia. She was a known prostitute, and she takes Worley back to her mother's house. She must have been so uncomfortable with this guy that she's like, okay, I'm gonna go back so someone at least sees me with this guy. So you wouldn't normally think
I think you're right. And you know what? When I think back to it, her family did not know that she was a sex worker. They knew that she danced in some clubs in Detroit. They knew that she, you know, had gotten herself into trouble, but they did not know that she was a sex worker. So you're right. I think it was very bold of her to bring him to her parents' house.
Yeah, and she probably felt very uneasy around him because, like you said, he was kind of creepy around women. So again, yeah, it seems like she wanted somebody to know that she was with this guy.
Mm-hmm. There's also another, she was a teenager at the time, Lori Ann Hill. I'm sure that's a very well-known name in this area. She was found murdered in Swanton. She had been walking late at night. People associate her with Worley all the time, and we've never been able to confirm that. I know that police have looked into multiple people, but I will say that as many calls and tips and notes I get about Worley, he probably did more, but he didn't do everything out there that people think that he did. But I know that's a name, Lori Ann Hill, that comes up all the time.
Right. And I wanted to go back to when you were talking about this manifesto earlier, and I was kind of leafing through the letters that he had sent you, and he said something interesting. He said, you know, Mel, nobody is a better expert on the Sierra jogging case than me, because all I do is sit in my cell and study the court record, study the case. I know everything about it all day long. This is what I do. So when you watch your interview with him, he pretty much had an answer for everything. A lot of times he was the victim and he did a lot of victim blaming, but he studied this so much that he probably does know about the Sierra jogging case more than anyone else.
Well, the frustrating thing about him, you know, and I had talked to, he's now retired, but the lead detective on the Sierra jogging case out in Fulton County, just letting him know, hey, I'm going to interview him. What are your thoughts? And he said, just be prepared for him to talk you in circles. And that's what he tried to do. You know, I left there feeling like, I don't know if he truly believes what he's saying or he knows these are all lies, but he's an extremely frustrating person to talk to. He sweat through a stack of towels this big. And he was angry because he really thought that I was gonna show up there and just believe everything that he said and not challenge him on anything. And so I wrote to him after we left, not on too great of terms, and explained, listen, any reporter that would come out of here would question you about these things. And, you know, our relationship's been a little bumpy since then, but hopefully we can get on track, just because, to be honest, I'd like one day for him to admit some of these things.
Yeah. And there was a pretty extensive conversation in the newsroom about, because Worley wanted us to publish this entire 105-page manifesto. So there was a pretty extensive conversation about do we or don't we, and obviously we didn't give it any real serious consideration about publishing it, but.
No, because I think that's, maybe a little sensitive to the families. I don't know why the reason was that we didn't do that. The only person that has a copy of this manifesto other than me is Detective Goodlett, who you saw there in the piece. I did turn it over to the police.
Yeah, so I mean, this is obviously one of the biggest cases in Northwest Ohio history, and it's something you and I will definitely remember the rest of our careers and lives, probably.
Yeah, we're going to let you guys know once we find out if that execution date has been reset. Right now, it seems to be up in the air. Like I said, the governor is not going to be allowing any more executions probably during the rest of his term. I want to let you know we do have extended clips where we've pieced out some of the interview for you on YouTube. We did not post the whole thing on there. We also have an incredible article about all this on our YouTube channel, as well as stories that we've done from the very beginning.
On WTOL.com.
On WTOL.com, in our YouTube page. This is actually our first case files. I feel like we could have done 2 or 3 case files on this.
Easily.
But listen, if we find any more victims, we'll be here again. Thanks so much for joining us for 11 Investigates Case Files. For Brian Duggar, I'm Melissa Andrews. We'll see you next time.